Alrighty, let's come together and we'll just kind of work together from wherever we're at. Now I will say, like, identifying the structure, like, it's a little bit art, right? Where it's like you might know some different things and make slightly different decisions. That's okay. What I'm hoping we'll do is, as we talk and we see even slightly different ways of breaking up, we'll see though how the flow of the story and identifying the flow helps us identify the main point easier. All right. So, all right, look at this. Does that show up? Yeah, all right, that shows up. Okay. All right, so I think we can all agree the first section starts at 2:4. Yes. All right, we're off to a great start. Where did people have that section end? Yep. 5. So, yep, so you just kind of had it as almost like a title section. Yeah. Yep.
As a summary.
That's exactly.
Of previous.
Yep.
This is 1:1 through 2:3.
Yep.
To me, it was when you get to 5. Now we're looking at a different
section.
Yeah, different topic, different.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So it's kind of like these are the generations of is kind of like always these hinge verses. They're like, okay, we're wrapping up this section, we're going to a new chapter, but let me remind you about what just happened, right? It's like these hinges, right? And so we've just had this big picture overview of creation, but we even were left with some questions, right? Like, who is this God? Well, actually, interestingly enough, right away in verse 5, we found out who this God is, right? It's not any God, it's Yahweh God, right? All capital letters for Lord, which is the kind of the way of not pronouncing his name, but it's Yahweh. So it's not any God. It's not Baal, right? It's not Marduk. It's Yahweh. So now we've gotten some clarity on that one question, right? And we're going to get more clarity. But okay, so we have kind of this summary, kind of linking us back, and now we kind of jump into this story now where we're kind of zooming in now a little bit on one particular part of the creation story, right? So where did people have verse 5 go to? Yep. Verses 5 through 7, okay. Let me put that up there. And then, how did you try to summarize that section? God made man. Okay, yep. Did anybody have a different way of breaking this down? I'm just kind of curious.
4 through 9.
Or kind of 5 all the way through 9?
5 through 9, yeah.
Okay.
Because it was talking about the creation of the garden.
Yep.
The fact that he mentions Adam, it's not really a creation. It formed the man of dust in verse 7. But if you look, everything it's telling you about the garden.
Right, so like 5 and 6 is about the garden, right? 7 is the creation of the man, but then 8 and 9 we're back to the garden.
Yeah, back to the garden. To me, Adam is incidental, especially given what we read later on in this section.
Okay, yep, so you would say, okay, 7 maybe to 9 because it's more about creation of the garden. Okay, so I'd love to get, I can't talk, I should slow down. Anybody else have another way of breaking it down, or do people say either 5 through 7 or 5 through 9?
We did 5 to 6, and then we had 7 standalone.
7 standalone, yep. So, okay, yep. What problems are introduced in verse 5? Yep, no one to kind of work the ground, right? So kind of we have this initial kind of problem kind of step. So I think that's worth flagging that some of the section is, so I think the creation of Adam is important because it addresses this problem, right? If you have a world but nobody to work it, it's pretty useless, right? So I think you could either break it at 7. So let me do this. So then you had verses 8 to where then? 8 to 9, okay. So we can either keep them together or separate them. I'll put a bracket to show that they could be together as well, right? But here we've got, what, God creating man and a garden, right? You can maybe put it that way. And we learned something about what makes man unique of all the creatures that God made.
The image of God.
He's the image of God. And what makes him the image of God is that he has God breathe his spirit into him to give him life, right? So everything else, dogs, cats, birds, they all have a body, but they don't have a soul the way that a human does, right? We have this ability to relate to God because he's breathed his spirit into us that no other creature has, right? So that's part of what makes us unique as his image bearers, right? Okay, so then where did the section on verse 10, where does that section go, you think?
Through 14.
10 to 14? All right. And how would you summarize that section? Yep. So he creates 4 rivers connected to Eden. What's the point of describing the rivers and everything going on there?
I think one of the things that David identified was that 5 through 9 are things within the garden. 10 through 14 are talking things outside the garden.
Okay. Yep. So kind of more outside the garden. But other people agree with that? Notice that? Have different thoughts?
Descendant, that's the word I got in mind.
Yeah. Yep. So, so you've got kind of this description of, okay, so the world outside the garden, we're saying? And the description is meant to evoke what? Like, is this a bad place? Is it a good place? Like, what's it like?
The story behind each place, later on in the Old Testament.
Yeah. Yep. So we see that we have all these other places described, but we're seeing still that this is part of God's good creation, right? There's gold. There's right. I mean, rivers bring life, right? So we see this again. This highlight God's good creation, right? All right. So then, verse 15.
Is that at that point almost like foreshadowing that there's more to come?
Yes, because kind of this part's kind of popped into the story and then it's like dropped, right? And then it doesn't kind of show up again in chapter 2. It's like there's this little thing, but it only really comes back into play in chapter 3, which is interesting, right? So this is 15 to where?
17.
And 15 to 17. And how would you summarize this section?
That's warning.
There is a command or restriction to eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
All right.
And that's probably the first command.
Yes, this is the very first command, right? And there's only one command. That's it. Just one command. All right. So,
Why you talk about a delicious tree? That's a big problem.
yeah. Well, there's lots of other good trees in the garden, though. It's not like, it's like, well, you could eat from the thorn bushes, or you could eat from the one good tree that God's put off limits. Dang it. We have to go for the thorn bushes again because we have to obey. All right, but we'll see that more in chapter 3. All right, so then the next section starts at verse 18. Where does that section go to? 20, people would say? Is that?
20.
I'd say 18 stand by itself.
Okay.
He needs a helper.
Yeah, he needs help.
And needs a helper, and not a partner. Just a helper.
Yeah. Yeah. So Adam's missing a helper, which that word helper is even used for God with his people. So it's not a derogatory term. Okay, like sometimes we're like secretary, like lesser than, but helper is a position of honor. So he's missing a helper. So then verses 21 to where? 25. All right, and then how would people sum up that?
Helpers
helpers provided.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
On, the first time that we see the word Adam
Yep.
is in, but for Adam, right?
Yep.
So I think people who read this may be confused and say, where did God says Adam?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
I think people who actually, if you read the footnotes.
Yep.
It says that, man, Adam sounds like, and may be related to Hebrew for ground.
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting.
Yep.
You know, if people don't read the
Yep.
additional
Yep.
context.
Yep.
behind it,
Yeah, it is interesting when names pop up. So talk about characters, right? So Adam, you know, he was just made out of the ground,
Yeah.
so he's called ground.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
and then it's interesting. Well, notice in chapter 3, Eve is not named as Eve until very late in the chapter, and it's actually very significant when she's named Eve. So we're so used to knowing who she is that we read it back early in the story, but she's not called Eve anywhere in the beginning of the story, which I think will be important to take a look at. But all right, so Adam provides a helper, and it's interesting. You kind of have. I kind of noticed this. I don't know if you guys did, but there's kind of two larger sections you could even break it up into, right? Because you have two problems. There's no man to work the ground, and then problem 2 is the man needs a helper. And so we have these two sections, right, where God provides a man in the midst of this good world, but still a problem, he needs a helper, right? And so that's what kind of God's doing. Yep.
I mean, the 21 to 25 introduced the concept of marriage, even though it did not say marriage here, but it's the idea of a man and a woman became husband and wife,
Yes.
multiply, and all that kind of thing.
Yes, so, yep.
Made another Robert or Steve or anything like that.
Yes. Which again, if we're thinking about how we're reading this in context, right? In chapter 1, we were told God made humans in the image of God, male and female, both in his image, both equally valuable, right? So now we come to chapter 2, and we get that fleshed out. What does it mean that he made them male and female? Why did he make them male and female? Well, if their mission is to multiply, you kind of need a male and a female, right? That's just part of God's design, right? And so, like, gender and sexuality aren't arbitrary, but they're part of God's design for how he's made human beings, right? And so it's not up for debate, according to God's word. It's clear. We can be compassionate as we talk to people about these issues, but it's really clear. And it's like, just like anything else, I mean, if you try to take a device that was made to do one thing and try to make it do something else, it just doesn't work very well, right? And that's the same thing here, right? So, yep.
I have a question on the river again.
Yep.
Is that river the first time God created, make the river? But I don't see the word river in chapter 1, is it?
No, so he doesn't mention river in chapter 1. No, he just describes splitting of the earth and land, right? So again, I think chapter 1 is like this very big picture overview of creation. Chapter 2 is zooming in. So now we're getting some more texture, right? Of, well, what did this creation look like? Well, it wasn't just one hunk of land and water all around it. There's rivers, right, that symbolize life flowing throughout, right? There's even in the book of Ezekiel, it talks about Eden as like being on a mountain. So even this idea of like the rivers flowing down from Eden, right, to water other places. And again, this idea of Eden, like a garden, and the idea of it being a mountain in Ezekiel, like this is all this idea of like, this is the place where in the ancient world they viewed the gods would meet with people, right?
Of Eden, I think later on in Revelation, let's say God created Eden, new Eden.
Yes, so in Revelation, it talks about the new heavens, the new earth as a recreation of Eden. The tree of life's there. There's a river of life, right? So all this Eden language, because when things go wrong, as we'll see in chapter 3, God doesn't give up on earth. He says, no, I'm going to redeem it and make it again what it was supposed to be, right?
He brought everyone to go back into Eden.
Yep.
Because of the sin. They kicked them out. I mean, God kicked
Yep,
them out.
which we'll get to that in chapter 3, so hold on there. Yep.
It's so important to me in Genesis 2, the tree of life.
Yes,
Always in
the tree of life is so important.
yeah.
Yeah, right. It's not just a command warning from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but there's also this provision of the tree of life, right? And you're free to eat from it, right? So, yep. All right, so looking at this, was anybody able to come up with a sentence to summarize what they think the main point of this is?
Thank you for chapter 1. We can now.
Okay, yep. So do you want to tell us what yours is? We'll throw it up on the board.
Human at God designer. Let me see. And to live harmony together as a man and woman.
I think it's also important to include about the command. And the tree of knowledge of that important, we need to include it in the sentence somewhere.
Okay, so we got God designed humans to live in harmony as man and woman. So that's a really good summary of probably this section right here, right? But it kind of doesn't tack any of this section here. So you're right, we probably need to add some things to this, right? And this is actually something I find really helpful, is sometimes I'll just write up an initial sentence, and then I'll ask myself, is there anything really significant from the passage that's missing in this that I really need to have in there? Otherwise, it's not really a good summary of the main point of the passage, right? And for me, what I often look at is, if I've identified my structure, is every part of the structure represented in the main point? Or is there a section of the structure that's completely missing? So right now we've got, this section's really good, right? God designed humans to live in harmony as man and woman, but we're kind of missing this section here. So does anybody else maybe have a sentence, or even just right now some ideas of words that we could, kind of add into this, or even just your own sentence that we can write up to kind of compare?
Would you put somewhere in there something like God created man to tend the garden? Or to tend to God's garden?
Yeah, to tend God's garden. I like that. Yes, because you're right. We have a purpose, right? We have this ruling over creation purpose that's here. So God designed humans to live in harmony as man and woman, to tend God's garden. We also put care for the world, but yeah, that idea. I like that. I think that really.
Follow his command.
What?
And follow his command.
Ah, so there you go. So Tim has mentioned this, right? That this idea of command is really important. To tend God's garden under his command.
He gives humans everything they need to live and to flourish and all that, but it's only have that one restriction.
Yep. Yeah, so there's this, it's so clear, right, that God's provided everything they need to succeed here, right? Yep. So we got God designed humans to live in harmony as man and woman, to tend God's garden under his command. Do you think that's a pretty good summary of the passage?
Yeah.
I think you guys are doing good. Now, you guys didn't take that long to kind of come up with this, right? I mean, we worked on it, but it's only been between your group time and our time talking together just a little over half an hour to get here. So part of what I want you to see is you really can get here in not a ton of time, especially if you kind of pull up this tool. Like, I find it really helpful. If I don't have a lot of time to be in a passage, I just start by asking myself, all right, I'm just going to read it and try to identify the structure and the main point. Because then you don't get as lost in the weeds, and you'll really see kind of the main thing. And now it's going to help me connect to Christ and think about application, because I'm going to think, okay, well, if God's designed me, how am I living this out, right? But we need to think about, how do we live this out in light of Christ, right? So that's something we've got to think about. So that's what we'll turn to next. So